Every rumor cycle has at least one leak that just doesn't add up. This time it's something that Sony Alpha Rumors put out a few days ago about the upcoming a7V spec sheet, claiming no open gate, no pre-capture, and 4K 60 that still has a crop. I don't buy it, and I'll tell you why. I've also got the date and time, along with what we can expect to see in the Sony a7V. And if you're already subscribed, please have a check to see that you're still subscribed, because some viewers have recently been unsubscribed by YouTube. Hi, I'm Simon. I love scanning the news and rumor sites, patent applications, and pro forums so that you don't have to, saving you time for more important things like watching this video with a nice cup of joe. Now, after my last video about the Sony a7V, where I got the information from Sony Alpha Rumors, I was actually surprised by the comments. Now, many of you weren't happy that Sony said no to OpenGate, no to pre-capture, and kept the crop at 4K 60. And other than no OpenGate, no Sony employee has ever said we would not get pre-capture, that 4K 60 would still come with a crop. And I never felt that these specifications really added up. Now, this video is not to attack the specifications, but to give you what I feel Sony will deliver based on my experience covering this marketplace. Sony isn't going to leave 4K 60 with a crop when the competition doesn't offer it. And pre-capture? Well, it's become the most, well, I should say not anticipated, but the most desired new capability for wildlife photographers. I'd be surprised if this capability, this pre-capture, doesn't arrive in the Sony a7V. But OpenGate? Features like false color, EL zone, and OpenGate don't get used much, so they don't see a lot of value in implementing them. And Sony reconfirmed from another source, we're not going to offer 6K OpenGate. And those quotes came directly from Sony employees, Sony reps, two different ones. Now, not providing OpenGate, I kind of agree with Sony. It's not going to disappoint a lot of video shooters. Not enough to dent sales, so that's their call. But from a company that has, well, built its reputation in the mirrorless world at being first, at innovating with new capabilities, to be last with things like OpenGate and pre-capture at this price point, well, that is a bit of a surprise. And while the competition has come out with some serious power delivering 4K 120, OpenGate, 7K OpenGate, 7K RAW, 40 frames per second RAW, and a partially stacked sensor for faster readout speeds, Sony is one of those companies that's very careful with their lineups, with their segmentation. They're not interested in cannibalizing their current lineup, either above or below. Any update to the a7V must follow that principle. And with that principle in mind, here is a realistic baseline that we can expect to see in the Sony a7V, and the date is coming up later in this video. The date and time, as well as time zone. The a7V is going to have the same resolution of 33 megapixels. We can see that in this leaked photo, assuming of course it is from the Sony a7V. It'll have a backside illuminated sensor, and it will improve upon the readout speed to reduce the rolling shutter. And failure to do this, well, that will result in migration from some customers to Nikon and Canon. Now, dynamic range, we should see an improvement to 15 stops from the 14 stops that we see in the a7 IV. And ISO? Well, a base ISO of 100 to 51,200, expandable to 50 to 200 and 4,800. Sony's expected to deliver a new Bionz XR image processor and give us an updated AI processing chip with human pose, improved animal, vehicle, aircraft, and insect recognition, all that we see in the A7R5 and the Alpha 1 Mark II. So we can definitely expect improvements to the autofocus system, eye autofocus tracking performance, approaching what we see in the A7R5, but below the A9 III and the Alpha 1 Mark II, at least when it comes to speed and consistency. I have no doubt that Sony's going to blow past that 10 frames per second continuous stills. In 2025, 10 frames per second isn't aging well. And look, I know, I've shot for many years, and when it comes to any sort of general purpose shooting, sports or sort of fast action stuff, you can actually do quite well at around 7 to 10 frames per second. But, well, it's fast enough for many. The competition, they're doing 40 frames per second RAW at 32 megapixels. There's no reason why Sony can't expand the continuous shooting to between 15 and 20 frames per second, supporting CF Express 4.0 V4 Type A slots. And the buffer? Well, don't expect too much of an increase there, keeping the a7V segmented well between the top shelf and more affordable cameras. This is how Canon segments cameras like the R50, which shoots at 30 frames per second, whereas the R6 Mark III at 40 frames per second. With the R50, you can shoot for a whole second before it takes several seconds to clear. Specs look great, but performance in the field leaves something to be desired. So there's no reason why Sony can't push up that frames per second on the a7V, and I think, again, Sony being Sony, we're probably looking at between 15 and 20. Now, an electronic shutter, in terms of the shutter speed, I'm thinking they're going to go up to go down to 1/1/16,000th of a second, although I wouldn't be surprised if they do stick to 1/8,000th of a second. All this means that we should be able to get about, 60 to 80 RAW at full speed? Good enough, but staying away from the A9 III's high 120 frames per second with its global shutter. Now, in terms of video, obviously 7K oversampled 4K up to 60 frames per second uncropped. This is what the a7V must do, and do so without a crop to meet up to the competition. But that's not where it's going to stop. We expect it to be able to go up to 120 frames per second in 4K because, again, the competition's already set the bar. But don't be surprised if there's a slight crop, maybe a 1.2 times crop, and not the 1.7 times crop that we saw with Canon a few years back. That was annoying. It was like shooting with a completely different camera. Now, without cannibalizing the a7S III and the FX3, the a7V will deliver XAVC-HS, XAVC-S, XAVC-S1, 10-bit 422 internal, up to at least 600 megabits per second. And I do expect Sony to deliver all intra, but limit it to some resolutions and refresh rates, as we saw them do with the a7S III. Now, S-Cinetone, S-Log3, and S-Log2 and HLG are all expected. Originally designed for APS-C cameras, the E-mount isn't large enough to provide enough room for the sensor to move, to provide Lumix-like stabilization. And I get it, these aren't record-breaking specifications. These are a pretty conservative baseline of what I can expect to see in the a7V. But increased speed, faster throughput, and an autofocus system that thinks more like us, well, that will provide solid improvements to not just photographers, but videographers. It also keeps the a7V from taking the lunch money, the business, away from top-shelf cameras like the A1 Mark II, the A7R5, and the A9 Mark III, but offer enough standout against the FX3 and the A7C. But I wonder, how will it be viewed against the competition? Well, first let's take a look at the Alpha 1 Mark II. It was recently refreshed, as was the A9 Mark III, giving the a7V a clear ceiling as what we can expect to see in that camera. And this matters to Sony more than anything else. They're not about cannibalizing their top-shelf cameras. That matters more to them than matching the Canon EOS R6 Mark III and the Nikon Z6 Mark III. But that's not to say that Sony won't have a surprise planned. Something that has, well, the a7V stand out against the a7 IV. Perhaps something that Nikon and Canon haven't already thought of. Now, Sony isn't the first to market in the segment. Canon has released 2 whole updates since the a7 IV. That's a lot. A lot has changed. And this is a strange place to be because, well, Sony was the leader in mirrorless cameras for years. I remember in 2019 I was looking at getting a new camera and I just wasn't happy with what Canon had, and everybody told me, go to Sony, they offer far more capabilities. But I thought I'd wait because Canon was getting ready to release a new camera, the EOS R, and when I saw the specifications, I was shocked. I was disappointed because Canon hadn't caught up to Sony, and I knew in that price segment I was going to have to wait another 3 to 4 years for a refresh. So I started looking seriously at the competition, and Sony, I was waiting for the a7S III, but it didn't come, and guess what? Canon released the R5 before the a7S III, and the R5 completely, well, surprised the marketplace, didn't it? So now the competition is in a stronger footing. So what? I mean, that's good for all of us. That, if anything, will get Sony to think a little bit more and probably put a little bit more into this camera. The whole point of this video was to give you a baseline of what is expected to show up in this camera and not to overly hype you. And as soon as we get some validated leak specifications, I will update you. Now, when it comes to the EVF, expect something like a 5.76 million dot EVF instead of 9.44 million dots. And the LCD, well, I've got some really good news, as this photo indicates. You see right there? You see that hinge? That's identical to the A7R5's 5-axis LCD, which is one of the best hinges in the marketplace. I wish the Canon R5 Mark II had this 5-axis LCD. I just love it. I really do think it's the best articulating screen on the marketplace. It works well for videographers, bloggers, and photographers alike. The a7V is aimed at wedding and event shooters who do both photo and video, freelance shooting, corporate, YouTube, interviews, and talking heads, as well as enthusiasts stepping up from APS-C cameras who want one body to do everything quite well. Sony's still focused on delivering good photos at a good resolution without those massive files. Solid 4K with 10-bit codecs with the, well, resolutions and refresh rates that we've come to, well, appreciate, and decent slow motion and a reliable autofocus for humans and basic subjects. It's designed as a camera that we can travel with and trust for everything from family trips to paid gigs. And the price that feels high but not insanely high. And now it's time for the date and time and time zone. One source claims that the Sony a7V will be announced on December the 2nd at between 2 and 3 p.m. London time. That's between 9 and 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. While I'm not 100% certain yet, this timing seems very plausible. Well, that's enough for me to put it in my calendar, but not enough for me to, well, reserve time off from the office. Now, once we actually have the date and time validated, I'll schedule a live stream with my expert guest panel. And if you've overheard anything about the Sony a7V and any lenses to be announced in the next coming weeks, well, please reach out to me at simond8@gmail.com so I can share them with my audience. Now, if you are interested in pre-ordering the Sony a7V, once the embargo's lifted, and we do think that in the United States this time around, Sony might actually release the embargo with the announcement instead of making us wait 24 hours. So, if that's the case, then please consider using our smart pre-order links for B&H and Adorama in the United States, Wex Photo and Video in the United Kingdom, and Photocall in Europe. And a big thanks to those of you that pre-ordered the Canon EOS R6 Mark III from Photocall. Excuse me, I got something in my throat there. From Photocall, Wex Photo and Video, Adorama, and B&H. Thanks so much for your help. For each purchase, we get a small commission back, helping to keep the lights on and avoid those nasty, long, multi-minute, well, sponsorship ads that I just have no interest in doing. I also want to tell you about the big discounts that are currently on at Canon, Nikon, and Panasonic. I had a source reach out to me saying, I think that Nikon is getting ready to announce or do something with the Nikon Z9 Mark II because it's on sale huge. But no, actually, everybody has got really big sales, the best sales of the year. We haven't seen deals like this until what was it? December of last year, where we saw the best prices of that year. So the Nikon Z8 is $34.96. The Canon R5 is $27.99. We haven't seen anything lower than that since. The R5 II is now down to $38.99. The GH7 is $17.97. And there are many more other great deals and sales on. So again, please use my links down below to get the best deals. And thank you so much for watching. And, you know, I really do appreciate that you watch to the end, that you watch each of my videos. It means an awful lot to me. It takes an awful lot of effort to do these. I've changed how I do videos now. I'm not, unless it's something really, really big that's happening right away, what I generally do is instead of trying to release my video right away after the news or the rumor has come in, I tend to take a little bit more time to validate, to research, and to write out, well, a better video. And I don't know, maybe go back and take a look at a video from last year and let me know, do you see an improvement? Do you like what I'm doing with the channel? Is there something else you would like me to add? But that's it for now. We'll see you again soon. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye-bye now.